Zack Williams, editor of Backcountry Journal for Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, here for our next installment of Friday Night Ties. Today we're going to tie a very simple, easy to tie streamer. And when we think of streamers, probably the most well-known fly of all time is the woolly bugger. And it's often thought of as pretty easy to tie, but I've got a little confession. To me, it's not always that easy to tie well. It's easy to tie, it's a simple fly, but if our hackle isn't quite the right length or our marabou isn't quite right, the proportions can end up looking kind of wonky at the end. So this fly is what I would consider easier than a woolly bugger. It has very few materials, and it maintains the same profile as a woolly bugger. So when we think of streamers, we usually tie them to imitate some sort of bait fish or something like that, and it's often talked about as a teardrop profile. So the front of the fly is the widest profile, and it tapers nicely towards the back. So most good streamers are going to have that profile, and that's what we need to accomplish. And so this fly, well, this one has, I call it the EZleech, but it maintains that teardrop profile, and you can tie it in a bunch of different varieties. We're going to tie black and blue today, and if you're going to have 3 colors of streamers, I think black and blue, olive, and white covers most of your bases, whether it be for trout or bass or even saltwater fish. So the other, the benefits to tying a fly that are this simple are far and wide. I mean, we maintain that profile, we use only a small number of materials, and additionally, I mean, I come from a guiding background, even though I'm not guiding anymore. Just want to be able to turn out a lot of flies when they're getting lost on a regular basis. So this one meets all those standards for me, and there's kind of a cool story, at least for me, in memory with this fly. This one here I found in my box, and it's left over from like 15 years ago, and I was traveling for 3 months fishing in Argentina, and I brought along just a little box of fly tying materials, including some rabbit strips and stuff like that, and that was all I had. There wasn't any access to anything else, and so, you tried to be prepared with different flies for when you get down there, but you don't really know with no past experience what you're going to come up against. So I was fishing for sea run brown trout, and I wasn't catching many fish, and I needed to come up with a fly that would work with my limited materials. The water was kind of off colored, and I came up with this little black and blue EZleech with the rabbit strip as the main material and just a little bit of blue flash. And I had so few hooks left with me. This was towards the end of our 3 months, that I was every day chopping up other flies so that I would have hooks to use to tie more of these as I was going through them each day, as they started to work so well for these big sea run brown trout. So anyways, by the end of the trip, I had a couple left over, and this one's all rusty, but still floating around the house in my fly tying materials. So found one of those. Nowadays, I'll often tie it on a tube fly. So here's a little tube with an olive version that I use for trout a lot here in Montana. Here's another black and blue version tied on a tube. That was a steelhead fly, and so it's a fly that'll do everything. Just takes a couple minutes to tie, and you can vary the amount of weight, the size, and the hook and everything based on what you want to do. So today what we're going to use is a size 6 straight eye streamer hook. This one's a Diariki, but doesn't matter. I like the straight eye for this if I'm going to tie it on a regular hook. Otherwise, as mentioned, I'll tie it on a tube often. Next item we're going to need is usually we'll tie it with some type of weight, although that's not absolutely necessary. But so I've got a little black lead eye here. Then this one's going to be a small one, and the small one I like to tie with pine squirrel strip. So if it was a larger pattern, I would use a rabbit zonker strip, but this is a black pine squirrel strip. And then I have some blue angel hair, Flashabou, something like that to give it that black and blue look. So that's it. Hook, a little bit of weight, and 2 materials. Really easy. So let's dive into it. First step is we're going to lay down a base of thread. So starting up near the eye of the hook, coming all the way down the shank to the bend and back, just covering that entire hook shank. Next, I'm going to tie in my eyes. So we're going to use a figure 8 wrap to bind these down. Make sure you give yourself just a little bit of room in front of the eyes near the eye of the hook. So one of the decisions when we're adding eyes like this is how do we want this hook to ride. So if I put the eyes on top here, that is going to make this fly ride keeled up. So the eyes will flip the fly to the bottom, the hook point will ride up, which some people like, can prevent the fly from snagging on the bottom. Otherwise, if I want this hook to ride traditionally here, point down, we're going to flip the eyes over onto the bottom here, and that'll keep the point down. You could also use a cone or a bead head on this fly if you prefer. So pick your poison there. So, eyes. Now we take our pine squirrel strip. And the end result, the fly we want here, is going to end up about maybe a little more, but about twice the length of the hook shank. So if my tail extends about a hook shank length past the fly, that should be about appropriate. So choose your hook with the idea of the end fly being about twice the length of the hook, and then make your tail extend about that hook length past. So I'm binding that down securely. Next thing I'm going to do is grab a couple strips of my blue angel hair. For most purposes, I think people probably use a little bit too much flash in a fly like this. I only really want 3 or 4 strands there that I'm going to bind in at the tail and extend back the same length approximately. It's good to have your flash not be all uniform in length. That creates a very unnatural look in the water. So it's okay for them to be a little bit ragged and not even back there, but they're about the length of the tail. So I've bound those down, and now I'm going to bring my thread forward to just behind the eyes and notice I didn't trim my pine squirrel strip here. Now we are going to palmer this forward like a hackle. So I'm wrapping one wrap in front of the next and kind of using my fingers to make sure those little pieces of fur are not binding each other down. And I've come up to my thread right behind the eye there. And I am going to bind this down with a couple wraps. Trim that off. Bring my thread in front of the eyes there. Grab my whip finish. Whip finish. Trim thread. Add a little bit of super glue or head cement for durability. Just a drop. Now, that is it. That's the EZleech. It is the easiest fly you could ever tie. So I encourage you to not overthink these fly patterns. The fly tying's fun in its own right, and you can get as creative and complex as you want. If you enjoy it, that's awesome. But from a purely going fishing standpoint, don't feel like you have to overcomplicate this. So this fly is a pine squirrel or a rabbit strip and a couple strands of flash. That's it, and it's been extremely effective for me, and you can fill a box up with them very quickly. So black and blue, olive. This one you can, if you want, it's one more step. You can add a contrasting color of a little saddle hackle at the front. So I added a little bit of orange saddle hackle on top of the olive there. Mixed it up a little bit, but overall keep it really simple, and I think it'll do well for you. Thanks for tuning in. Check out Backcountry Hunters and Anglers for us, and join us fighting for your wild public lands, water, and wildlife. We could use the support, so thank you.